Welcome to the TRPI Encounters. Today we have Aastha with us as our speaker, and the topic for today's talk is Prose for Proseterity. A literary magazine was born in the turmoil of a global pandemic to publish prose with a purpose, hope. Hope that is anchored in the radical empathy, critical thought, and intersectionality. Hope that fuels tomorrow. Proseterity thrives on challenging the status quo, one norm at a time, and speaks of alternative imagined futures. We look for voices of dissent, stories that use the personal I to speak the collective we. Transgress normative boundaries, experiment with form and format. Proseterity has a manifesto and editorial board that serves as an ethical and visionary compass. We encourage pieces that are unafraid to pose the new what ifs, speak uncomfortable truths, subvert different forms of power, extend words of solidarity, and prompt new definitions of our social ecosystem. We believe in the power of written word in shaping the futures, minds and lives. Proseterity is a space for one who writes with fire, urgency, truth and passion. We welcome Aastha to continue.
I'm having one of those days when one thing goes wrong and everything makes sure it goes wrong. And I've been on the road for 3 years. I'm really sorry and thank you so much for being so patient. I think are we good to go? It must have. Still not moving. Alright, so how many of you love reading? Just to show of hands. Alright, how many of you love reading literary fiction? Non-fiction? Reading outside of architecture? Oh, that's good. Would anyone like to share what they're reading right now? No? Outside of architecture specifically? A Room of One's Own, that's a good one. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Who is it by? Virginia Woolf, one of my favorites. Anyone else familiar with Virginia Woolf's work? A Room of One's Own, we'd like to think it's outside of architecture, but everything kind of finds its way back into how we talk about spaces, designs, entities, identities, and how we occupy those spaces, inhabit the world, from rooms to roads, to countries, to states, right? Are we good? So I started these writing workshops when we were hit by the P word a couple years ago. We don't say it, do we? So, never know. It turned out to be something that grew to be a rather global community. They were writing workshops out of my little bedroom and study. I would give people writing prompts, mostly based off of what I was reading or feeling or thinking, and realized that simple truths like that end up resonating with a lot of people. Ideas of grief, loneliness, creativity, killing time, what even was time or space, right? In the confines of our little homes for those of us who are privileged enough to be able to be confined to our homes. Turns out, people from across the world, from the US, Canada, Mexico City, Sudan, there was a string of commonality in the things that we were feeling, the things that we were thinking in that isolation. And in that isolation, we were all very connected. I would like to think we still are and haven't forgotten how powerful something as unfortunate, as grievous as a pandemic brought us closer, made us rethink new ways of talking to each other, collaborating, showing affection, making friendships, expressing desire, finding lovers over technology, over words, over images that we shared, and of course all the banana bread we baked. The writing workshops kind of triggered a long nascent ambition that I had, which was to start a publication. Lord knows we don't need more of those, so why this, right? We have so many publications. I never thought it would make it to print. It's only been a year and a half, but that leap of faith has resulted and manifested into a tangible copy that you can hold, read, flip through, share, send to people, read out of, find comfort in maybe. So I gathered a few of my friends, friends I had worked with, talked about everything and anything from poetry to politics to art to disease to architecture to the disdain for architecture, over coffee, over other beverages. And I found those friends while being in India, while studying in New York, while working there. And the wonderful thing was that at least 7 of those friends that I approached with an email that I sent with a lot of trepidation but also excitement, that I would love for you to, dear so-and-so, I'd love for you to come on board for this little venture I'm starting. I don't know what it is yet, but I know what it wants to do. I know what it wants to subvert. I know what questions it wants to ask. So, would you like to join me in making the world ask those questions? And all 7 of them said yes. I was, since Mamta was kind enough to invite me to talk about this little project of mine with you all here, I've been asking my editorial board, those 7 people, to send in little snippets of why and what they think Proseterity is, why they're here and what they like to do, how they want to see it grow. Few of them who did have the time and energy to do it have sent me a few video clips, so I would love to introduce you to these friends that I speak about. And it's, I know I'm getting rather emotional here. It's a very intellectual magazine, I assure you. But it's also not removed from the human experience, because that's what it started out to be. I think I have improvised enough for now. Can I go back to my script? How many of you are familiar with the word manifesto? Manifesto? The Communist Manifesto? Yeah? What does a manifesto mean? Like, largely speaking, if you had to explain it to someone, a child perhaps, like, we're writing a manifesto. Sounds rather rigid, doesn't it? Anyone care to, yeah?
It's sort of a statement made as a collective on a particular topic, like an agreed upon statement.
An agreed upon
Like a
statement
mission statement of sorts.
made as a collective
Yes.
on a particular topic.
Yes.
That's wonderful actually, all the great words. Statement, collective, on a topic, perhaps with an agenda, mostly with a kind of call to action towards the end. We came up with a manifesto as well, but it wasn't an agenda, it was definitely collective. It started as a Google Doc that we shared with 7 of us, and everyone started to rip it apart, 2 paragraphs, put their comments, put their edits, and yeah, that's. I will take you through the manifesto as well. Thank you so much. Okay, you all already know this was the wonderful introduction, which sounded way cooler when you said it than it sounds to me right now, but I see the interest in this room and I am really gratified and humbled to see that. What is prose? Often when I use the word, it kind of goes on to complicated literary jargon, sometimes confused with poetry, often looked at as inaccessible, complicated, perhaps too eloquent for consumption. But it isn't. What I'm doing right now is speaking in prose. When you write a text to someone, especially when you're fighting and it's a long paragraph, you're writing prose. We read prose, we engage with prose all the time. The sentences we make. So anything basically that formally or informally uses and utilizes the rules of language, syntax, grammar, basically talking using language, is prose. It can be a lot of things. It can be a report, it can be an opinion, it can be satire, it can be theatre, it can be a joke, it can be an essay, it can be an absurd set of lines that take you to another world. Everything from the mundane to the extraordinary. Prose is everything that we read, write, speak here, as I said. It is irrespective of how lucid it is or eloquent it is, right? Or which language it is spoken in. I'd like to introduce you to one member of the editorial board and a dear friend of mine, Maria, who is speaking to us from Lima in Peru currently. Could you not hear that? Maria is an architect by profession. We went to school together at New York, studied critical curatorial conceptual practices. She's an excellent scholar, works on the lines of cartography and also an educator at Parsons in New York. And just a wonderful person who is always attempting to decolonize the way we think about space and the world.
Why I'm part of Proseterity, why I love Proseterity, what I believe in it, it's because I think it is a wonderful space to bring together ideas and questions and emotions and just unpack them collectively. You know, that's what I love about even our editorial meetings, when we all come together and start from our own experiences, our own expertise, our own disciplines, just come and discuss all these questions and emotions and ideas and anecdotes and our own experiences in response to, like, in reality, to all these, the circumstances we're living in, and we collectively together unpack them and discuss them. And I think that's great, because even from all our differences, we're still able to find, like, similarities, points of connection, and also learn from those differences and contrasts in our backgrounds. And that translates into the publication, and I think that's amazing, because it's opening up this wonderful space through the written word and sometimes also through illustrations, a way to unpack and to bring these different voices together without any, pretentious aspiration, of, trying to impose an authority or a point of view, or even like trying to pose ourselves as even experts, but like allowing that space for people to unpack, right? To unpack, to explore through writing the circumstances we're living in, right? And I think that's wonderful. It's becoming these archives of histories, of voices, of experiences, and it's an entry point, to imagine something else, an alternative future, and I think that's wonderful. So that's why I love being a part of it. Hi.
So here's a glimpse of our manifesto. Maria did mention that we strongly deviate and discourage holding positions that place us as experts, right? What we are interested is in posing new what-ifs, looking at different voices, disrupting the status quo the way it is, and asking critical questions to the status quo, while also being grounded in what we like to call a radical empathy. Maria wrote a wonderful piece on radical empathy in our very first issue, which was called Issue Zero. What Issue Zero tried to do was position Proseterity as what it is, who it is, and what it wants to be. So through a set of different essays that responded to the manifesto itself, right? Speaking with radical empathy, imagining a different tomorrow. All the members of the editorial board contributed with different pieces. Another important member of my team is Rohit, a student at Ashoka University, and has been started as a creative intern, as a creative associate, who is a brilliant mind and has been with us for over a year now. So let's hear from Rohit a little bit.
Hello everyone, I am Rohit. I am the creative associate for Proseterity, and I've been here for over a year now. And if I were to best describe my experience in a word, I think it would be creativity itself, because I don't think any other word best encapsulates the vision and commitment than the word creativity. And I emphasize on this word because Proseterity takes it seriously and politically, and not in the conventional way in which I understand it. Which is to say that Proseterity is committed to a kind of creativity that is democratic in its dispensation and effectively aims at dispelling the illusionary homogeneity of popular discourses. I mean, one of the major aims of the publication is to democratize reading, writing, and other discursive practices outside of institutional structures. But what most inspires me about Proseterity is that such a commitment is not only, it's not only on the externality of it, as in like in reading, writing, but such a commitment is also within Proseterity, in its brainstorming, organizing, curating. So I think being a member of Proseterity, being part of the team, has really inspired me that way, that I've been able to explore my science, explore my own potential in many creative ways, and I've been able to contribute to it on that front. So I'm really committed to its vision of democratizing voices, taking on board multiple voices from multiple walks and facets of life. And yeah, I look forward to working with that.
So this was the cover of Issue Zero, designed by our art director, Jerry John, who has a background in architecture, disregarded it, became a graphic designer, and is, needless to say, excellent at what he does. I have copies of Issue 0 and Issue 1 for you. This is what our table of contents looks like. You're welcome to go on to www.proseterity.com and look at what we do. Also maybe interact with the manifesto when you hover your mouse on the manifesto on certain keywords, like you saw conversations pop up, conversations that we had among ourselves. I'm just going to run through the kind of essays and the titles that we've worked with in Issue 0. Weaponizing the portmanteau. As you know, proseterity isn't really a word in the dictionary. Prose and posterity get smooshed together for prose for posterity. Posterity meaning our future generations. So it started as a joke, a pun, where my partner actually really enjoys smooshing words together, but it kind of hit the nail in the head, I'd like to think, and had a ring to it, so we just went with it. Joseph took it a step further, weaponized it, talked about the meaning of language, how language is basically just mouth sounds, as he puts it, but it makes sense because we all agree collectively to the rules that language uses. And hence it starts to take on meanings, right? Same goes with currency. We agree that this piece of paper has a certain value, will buy you certain things, which is why it works as currency. Once taken away from objects, languages, discourse, phenomena, currency, our world would crumble apart. So, Joe wrote this beautiful piece about that. Marty, another member of the editorial board, wrote about the breadth in different languages, taking on from the idea of radical empathy and the commonality of heaving a sigh of relief to taking a deep breath, to pranayam, to smog and pollution, and taking those very different strands of what air, breath, and our container, the lungs, the pulmonary of the human forms, treat breath and air as. A very interesting piece. Maria, who you just kind of spoke to, wrote on radical empathy, very heart-wrenching piece. And I forget to mention, the artwork that you see is also commissioned by artists. So what we try to do at Proseterity is, once we have the text, once we've asked writers, either through an open call or through our contacts or ourselves, have written pieces, we also put out a call for artists, for illustrators, right? And then we match them with their styles, whatever their portfolio is, whatever it is that they've shared with us, with the writers, and we let the writer and the artist take it from there. We just connect them over email or WhatsApp or whichever. They talk to each other, they read the piece, they put out, different nuggets of thoughts. The writer and the artist basically collaborate to find and make something that's cohesive, that's not just textual but also visually stimulating, visually thought-provoking, and is an essay in itself, if I may say so myself. Of course, we also work with digital media. Sunaina Shah is also an architect, someone I went to school with, actually doing a very important project right now in Ahmedabad, the Lee Corbusier building's revitalization. Anyway, Sunaina addressed the fact that manifesto was too stringent, too definitive, too confining, and the fact that we did not want to position ourselves as people who are experts, who follow rules and make rules for others, and decided to write about unmanifestoing the manifesto, which is what we were doing in the first place. So it takes you through the history of what a manifesto is, the kinds of manifestos that have existed, and what we are trying to do differently through ours. One of the first questions we asked in that Google document that we collaborated on was, do we even want to call it a manifesto? So the first thing all of us did to it was strike out the title that said manifesto, but retain the fact that we did strike it out, because a part of democratizing conversation is also to put the disagreements and conflicts on display and see how we move through those. Issue 1 after issue 0 was on mediocrity. That was the theme. It started with these bunch of thoughts of how we are not incredible. We create incredible moments passing our life's work. This issue had an editor's note by yours truly, where I wanted to talk about how the word average has negative connotations, at least they've had negative connotations for me. How many of you think average is a compliment? You're average. Does that make you feel good? Anyone who feels good about that, right? But the truth is, most of us are average at most things that we do. And that's exactly what makes life bearable, right? So we want to be average in a lot of ways. We want to be average sized, average height, average skin tone, right? Average in the way of our temperament, chill, on a plateau, average. But at the same time, we also want to be excellent. We want to be extraordinary. We will shrug off the title of average, especially a room full of architects, designers, future architects and designers. Absolutely corrosive word to use, right, with people who create. to look at the things that I was doing in my life, what average meant to me, why it induced a sign of disdain, disgust, shame, and guilt, right? When I tried to associate it with myself. And question that. Sit with that discomfort of the word and just question it. And I realized that Joseph, the curator of this issue, had similar feelings and different feelings about the word itself. And we sat with that, unpacked it, and asked a lot of other writers to unpack it with us. Again, another wonderful cover by Jerry John. I wish he was here with me right now, but something held him up. This was issue 1. This was Jerry's interpretation of mediocrity. Let's hear it from the curator of the issue, Joseph, who put together this wonderful issue 1, and was paradoxically an excellent start to themed issues, starting with mediocrity.
Proseterity is a portmanteau. It's this incredible new word that our founder and editor Aastha has come up with. I believe it's also an incredible literary weapon, a way to reach people and sort of subvert or unpack certain concepts in society that maybe are harder to tackle. It's a collaborative space between creative thinkers, and now it is officially both a digital and print artifact, which is incredibly gratifying. My name is Joseph. I'm one of the people that sits on the editorial board for Proseterity, and I had the pleasure of curating issue 1, which was called On Mediocrity. I've somehow found a way to bring both the education and trauma from architecture school into this sort of literary endeavor and reach people in a different way from what I've previously been doing. And I thought it was one of the things that was the biggest fear of mine in architecture school was being average, and I think that is something shared among a lot of designers. We're so afraid of being average or not sort of overachieving constantly with everything that we make. It always feels very precious. So tackling that theme with this issue was really important to me and really very cathartic. And a lot of our team has a background in design. We have all sort of banded together and sort of found a way to communicate and reach people both visually and verbally with something like this, which has been really satisfying. And I've managed in sort of curating this issue, which I thought would be a bigger challenge. It was a lot of work, but it was super exciting and a wonderful surprise to see the breadth and depth of submissions for the issue. And I think the biggest challenge I had truly was the deadlines. It's something I've just hated and not been great with since my days at studio, but we've even managed to sort of inject a little bit of architecture into this issue. One of my favorite pieces is called Nobody Wants to Be a Four-Story Building by one of our writers, Marina. And this I thought was one of my favorite pieces, and I had the pleasure of also designing, collaging for this piece, so the illustration was a really fun interpretation of this sort of dichotomy or duality between, people constantly want to be the tallest, thinnest, shiniest object versus like what we understand to be sort of a traditional plain piece of community, like the fabric of the community. So I wanted to explore that with the collage, which was really satisfying. And yeah, it was just an incredible piece to bring together. All of the other writers and editors that worked on this really dove into the subject, and I think all identified with some sort of aspect of mediocrity, whether it's something that we're afraid of and that we need to break free from, or something that creates boundaries for a lot of our work, or really the society that we live in. What is mediocre? Who sets the standard? What is better than or less than? So it's incredibly satisfying, and I look forward to all of the designs and submissions that we will get moving forward.
So that was Joseph, or Joe as I like to call him, wrote this wonderful piece called The Hubris of Mediocrity, which he's actually summed up rather well. The collage Joseph showed you on the video wasn't the only one he worked on. We would sit for hours with tons of magazines strewn all over because we would be constantly on Zoom, navigating different time zones, but then again, who has a sleep cycle when you're a designer, right? And some very stimulating and provocative sentences and thoughts that came out of his ideas of mediocrity, his relationship with mediocrity. What makes mediocrity so rich is not just the joy it can bring, but the hard work, frustration, and self-doubt that leads to a fully realized final product saturated with agony and pride. Maria wrote a piece on average. What is an average height? What is an average weight? Who sets these standards? How colonial are they? How do we subvert them? How do we digress from them? How do we shun them, right? This was another wonderful collage by Joseph for another piece. These are a few postcards we designed, taking excerpts from the pieces that went with this artwork, and this is one of my favorites. Empathy is not superficial. Empathy is not fleeting. Empathy is not pity. Empathy dismantles power. Empathy leads to solidarity. And I'd like to add to that empathy is not savior complex. Another piece by Abu, who also you will meet shortly, was called The President and I, where he speaks about being an immigrant, a black man from the Arab world in the United States, the bureaucracy, the discomfort, the sense of insecurity, turmoil you feel even if you come from a fairly privileged background in your home state, and how all of the comforts, emotional, psychological, the ones that community brings, are stripped off from you, especially when you're navigating those waters called the visa. Some more artworks on the portmanteau, small surprises in a largely dull world, what the anti-ordinary was, and how people met it, how you render to mediocrity by Sheena. This is an extract from Sheena is a writer, and this is how she talked about language, tongues, and the average. I play with turns of phrases. I love striking the right one, fussing over punctuation, contracting an unwieldy sentence, or breathing life into an uninformed one. A lot of writers write about writing, and it's always very interesting to see how each of them treat their passion, their profession, and their provocation with a sense of frustration and, as Joe said, agony and pride. And there's always a sense of commonality, solidarity as a writer myself, that I feel in that shared anguish, but also the very rewarding nature of typing away aggressively, fiercely, letting all of it out. More often than not is to produce garbage, but there we go. We have an Instagram page called Proseterity. Please spell it right so you land on the right page. We unpacked the ideas beyond what we wrote on the issues. So, are you familiar with Chicken Soup for the Soul? Or is this the wrong generation I'm talking about? You were born after 2000, right? And you still know Chicken Soup for the Soul? Well done. So that typeface might be familiar. So we kind of collated, you'll see it on our Instagram page, we collated comfort foods from around the world that are very average, right? They're not sophisticated, gourmet, but they're very comforting. When you're sick, when you're lonely, when you're homesick, when you want to show your affection to someone, when you want to bring a piece of your culture, of your home, onto a table that may not be familiar with it. So we collated a bunch of comfort foods from around the world, made a post about that. This is Joe and his many frustrations with deadlines. I thought I should share a little bit of that as well. A glimpse of our rendition. I had a Gen Z work on this is not on me. Because everything has to be snazzy on the reels, right? Yeah. We had a small launch at social. This is how it looked. You can see the manifesto there that we encourage people to also come and mark on. So that is truly democratic always. That's me obsessing over things as usual. And on to this is it. This is my concluding slide. I have copies of Proseterity. Please drop by. I'm happy to sell them to you at a discount. This is Abu, who's going to be curating the next issue themed on faith. And let's hear it from Abu.
Hello, my name is Abu Bakr Ali, and I'm on the board of Proseterity along with Aastha. When Aastha contacted me very early on to discuss setting up the magazine, I had no idea how fast it would develop and how big it would come. And I'm very happy to have been on it on the ground floor, as they say. In our early discussions, we talked about major themes and goals that drive Proseterity in the present day. And namely, this was pursuing the mission of hope and attempting always to challenge the status quo. And we hope to do this by cultivating narratives that centered on radical empathy and on critical thought. And for me personally, actually, Proseterity was a platform to provide sort of an insight on how the proverbial other sees the world, and to explore the stories of figures that are often peripheral in the general narratives that tell the stories of our lives. My first piece, titled "The President and I," aimed through outlining a set of executive orders issued around the time of the pandemic that basically paused issuing visas for foreign nationals and for refugees entering the US. It aimed to basically provide a parallel narrative outlining the effect of these policies on those impacted the most by them. I will actually be editing the upcoming second issue of Proseterity, and that's centered on the theme of faith. My hope for this issue is to expand upon what we all consider generally as faith, or what qualifies as faith. And also to explore the role of faith in our everyday lives, how we depend on it, how we lean on it, how it supplements us, but also to look at how it could include us or exclude us from our immediate communities, how it transgresses between the thresholds of the personal and the communal. For me, I think the topic of faith is something that is still relevant to this day. And with someone from my background who comes from not the Western world, but the sort of Southern Hemisphere, it's still a very relevant topic that I think is worthy of discussion. I hope all of you enjoy Proseterity, and look forward to you reading our next and upcoming issue. Thank you.
So yeah, that was Abu, that was a little bit of Proseterity. If you are a writer or illustrator, definitely get in touch if the themes call out to you. Questions? Thoughts, questions? Yes.
I was just wondering, in the recent decades, there's been this sort of explosion of a zeal culture in the city. One is that, why do you think that? Because this seems like, in terms of its circulation, its size, and its content, or the way it is created, seems like the format of a zeal. Not like a pamphlet, which is...
Yeah, it is a magazine, yes.
Yeah, but it's also a limited circulation sort of option in some way. And in its informality of production and distribution, it also has the nature of the zine culture that is emerging. So I want to ask you, what do you think the place of that kind of publication is? Why it exists now? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a really good question and a great way to start this. round of question answers. We were a part of the Design Kya Hai festival at Bandra, Candies, just a few months ago. And I had the privilege of looking at a lot of other zines, as you call it. There's, very limited publication, but thought like 10 words in totality. I personally think that in the times when turbulence, grief, uncertainty becomes so commonplace, becomes such a status quo, we try to find ways to articulate and find some sort of permanence outside of the digital sphere. And there's something about paper, there's something about words on paper, art on paper, that has a permanence to it, that has an archival quality to it. Not to sound too romantic about print as a medium, because digital has its own place, has its own value, makes it accessible. But I do think that the culture, there's a revival of this culture simply because there are people bursting to say what they want to say. And finally, the world is opening up to listen to stories that are not conventionally said by people who look a certain way, belong to a certain social position. And I think zines, magazines, these independent publications truly democratize conversation at a very collective level. I hope that kind of...
That's also one thing in terms of the way the publication industry is.
Oh, the industry itself. I mean, I work as an editor as well. Everyone's always threatened by the idea that print is dying, print is dead, but it doesn't die. It comes back. It always comes back, it finds its way. It may not be an excellent business model, but we find other ways to keep it thriving. Something else funds the print and the paper. But they still there because, again, permanence, right? Your digital swipes don't stay in memory, but there's something tangible about even old magazines, a stack of it that you might go through 10 years later and think, oh, these were the times I lived through. Because they are kind of like time capsules in a lot of ways.
So I'm Binti and I'm the Dean of Research in this college, and I am also a book series editor with Routledge. And I edit a series called Urban Futures. Now that is typically academic writing. It's quite a challenge to inspire people to research and let alone compile them and write it in a publishable volume. So that's a big challenge. And I have been a researcher all the while. So I thought that, yes, coming to Sonal's question, that I thought that, okay, this is like heavy research. It's like too much for common consumption, for the PR level. So I thought of explaining it in lucid format, and that's how I came up with the idea of an e-book. Now that is precisely my question to you too. Number one is, what is your revenue model? How do you sustain a magazine like this sitting in New York? Number one. Second thing is, these are very heavy ideas which you're exploring, but the format, the template, and the presentation of it is very attractive. So what is the kind of response that you're getting, given the fact that your first issue was only in May 2021? So two questions, very straight. And also try to solve my challenge.
I think I'll take it from where you began. The jargon of academia to make it into common consumption, because the ideas that are propagated in the realm of academia, they're important ideas. They're always evolving, they're always being challenged. And I like to think that the threshold between academia and mainstream conversation is where I like to thrive. It's almost like a work of transliteration, where you take on those ideas and kind of impose a fantastical imagination over it as to who it impacts and how it might impact. Whether that's realistic or not is a question I try to answer later. What that does is it kind of removes the restraints that come in the way of translating academic ideas, very theoretical and research heavy, either philosophies or tangibilities. And once you remove those restrictions, once you remove the imagination of those challenges, translating it becomes easier. And I say translating it not to sound obnoxious about the fact that we speak two different languages, but that's exactly the kind of barrier you're trying to break out from, right? The gatekeeping of academia, the idea that if you are an academic, you ought to be speaking a certain way, and even if that way is appropriated and stolen from so many other para fields, right, and interdisciplinary cross-pollination of jargons and terminologies. So, which is why I think the editorial board becomes a very important facet of what Proseterity does, because everyone has research, everyone has a very strong academic background, mostly in design, which also automatically means in the arts, in literature, in history, in anthropology, we're not experts, but we know what it means to not know. So operating from that space of not knowing has been a very useful exercise for us, because we don't try to position ourselves as people who know, right? We position ourselves as people who want to know and ask to kind of like collectively be there using those provocations. To debug, right, exactly. Revenue model, we don't have one. I'm extremely economically unsound. If someone wants to help me figure that out, please call me. I'm like financially, honestly, it's a passion project and I'm just pumping my intellect, capital, whatever little I have, into, and hoping once it resonates, something comes out of it. Perhaps an institution backs it, some kind of grant backs it, but I feel like it's a little too early on to position it in that sense. But we're always on the lookout to understand who would like to support a venture like this. The fact that it's in print, again, was a leap of faith, because I wanted to see, what happens when it becomes tangible? Does it move differently in the world, right? Does its impermanence on the digital realm, is that challenged? And it was, like you asked, how did people respond to it? People found it beautiful, handy, very personal, and it's been very gratifying to, especially with the mediocrity issue, to see that so many of us are uncomfortable with that tag, with that adjective, right, and with the idea of average. But once it's articulated, once that discomfort is posed as a question, we try to start answering it. And once we try to start answering it, we find common ground. And while a lot of these bigger ideas seem very romanticized, seem very intangible and philosophical, what we're trying to do here is also bring them, like pull them back one strand at a time, one word at a time, one theme at a time, and see what happens when we focus on those strands, like mediocrity, like empathy, like faith now next, which might not necessarily mean faith in its most institutional religious stance, right? It could be faith in yourself, in your friends, in collective humanity, or the lack of faith in any of those things. All of these relationships to the words and themes become important. So I hope that kind of, yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Yeah. Can we do?
So, as someone who is also a writer, and I've worked individually, I've worked with other creators as well. What I've noticed is when you're working individually, you have a certain identity. You may go through phases, but there is a certain identity to what you're writing. But when you're working with other creators, it's rather dynamic. There's fluid changes. You sort of go through these sort of rapid changes because voices change, voices sort of grow. There's the growth of like several people sort of following with you. So with Proseterity, are you trying to keep up with that change, or are you trying to like sort of hold the original intent with the manifesto together, or are you giving into the sort of change as it flows?
It's a very interesting way to start that question, is because writers do work in isolation a lot. They do thrive in solitude as well. But there is a lot of value to editing, to collaborating, to talking about what you want to write. We are doing neither. We used the manifesto as a position, as a springboard at first, but we ripped it apart, as you saw. And in that ripping apart of the manifesto, it became an exercise in understanding that we are not afraid of discomfort and conflict even between ourselves, and we are not afraid of encouraging each other's lucidity in words either. And that kind of threshold between the individual and the collective is where we keep kind of, going back and forth from, so that the identities are kept intact, are respected, are allowed to express in the way they want to, and at the same time, how people are responding to those identities happens in situ first, before it's put out in the world. So it also becomes a way of safeguarding identities, of not censoring, but caring for those identities, and helping them thrive even outside of the boundaries that we create. I hope that's, yeah? Thanks for the question.
The term that you are the term that you are using, some empathy. I can't recollect. Radical empathy. Sorry. So can you explain what that means and who is it directed towards, this radical empathy?
That's, it's my favorite term, and I'm rather pleased with myself for coming up with something that is so aggressive and at the same time talks about the softness of the human experience, right? Radical and empathy. Empathy is never at the cost of yourself, right? It's not just putting yourself in other person's shoes, it is also inhabiting that reality in a way where you don't ostracize or cannibalize the self, to be able to either aid, support, or be in solidarity with the other. A lot of times when I have thought about the future and the kind of skills we need as humans, I've always found myself coming back to true, authentic empathy and critical thinking. So what happens when the two of them kind of combine, right? You kind of eradicate unfettered optimism, like the toxic positivity of things, and at the same time you also keep in check your cynicism that is definitely a result of the realities we live in today. We are under so many crises. Political, sociological, ecological, climate, everything is a crisis today. And living in that state of flux requires us to keep our hope up, but also in check, and have it informed by thought, but also by empathy for the common experience. Which is why I started with talking about these common experiences that have tied us, especially recently at a global level. And yes, that's where the idea kind of originated.
So I think what you mean is that we as a collective, the global collective, we are coming together in these kind of uncertain times, bringing us together, the challenges that we face, but the kind of responses that we have is also coming from a space of empathy.
Yes, exactly. Even if the grievances are not the same,
yes,
there is still a commonality in the way we respond to them, or the way we'd like to be taken care of in the face of those circumstances.
And in this process, we are actually questioning something. Maybe the social structures, maybe the traditions,
exactly,
the institutions, the way things are. So our discontent is coming out.
Absolutely, discontent is coming out. I think discontent also comes out very well in one format, which is, I think, the cultural icon of today's time, and that is memes. Yes. I think memes are fantastic.
Yes,
I think memes resonate at like the common ground that hits one frame of image and text, which is mostly ugly and very little to do with aesthetics, is fantastic, right? It's a time of our culture. And the way memes also kind of capitalize on the fact that, you know what, we're all going through shit. And this is the shit, and let's question it. Why is everyone why are words like depression, burnout common? Maybe we built the world wrong.
Anxiety.
Anxiety, OCD, and we throw them around, like pop psychology has become a thing. One of the frailties of talking about mental health, too much also becomes that. So how do we find that balance? How do we care for people, be there for them, and also understand the lines that cannot be crossed, that ought not to be crossed, but are often crossed. So, yeah, I mean, I think...
and then there is a backlash to that.
Backlash as well, because it has to be, right? That's how we keep moving. So this space of agility and constant movement is also something that requires critical thought and empathy. So that's what, yeah, that's one way that we are trying to put that in words and art. I feel like, have we exceeded time?
Thank you for the
Okay, so